this is our talk from UK Trade and Investment to give you some general hints on the do's and don'ts of exporting. I think, first of all, I always like to start by saying, why is this important? Why is trade important for the UK? And I think this slide illustrates it well. It's a very significant part of the economy. And so for all of us here in the UK, exporting is important. But more importantly for you is the question about why you as companies should export. And generally there are a number of reasons to export that you would all probably buy into, and they are these. First of all, the obvious ones of market growth through sales growth, increases in your productivity if you can simply sell your product or service more widely, a reduced reliance on the UK market and any fluctuations there, to extend the shelf life of your product and make it last longer and serve you longer. And of course there's the objective of creating and retaining jobs here as well. But here are some other reasons why else you may export, and these are reasons that people very often miss. It's often possible to significantly to increase your competitiveness generally from and through the successes that you have in overseas markets. It's frequently the case that success in overseas markets is a real stimulus to innovation and to product ingenuity or service ingenuity. And in meeting export requirements, it can really improve your potential in your home market as well. And then there are the softer considerations, like the effects it can have on developing the skills of your staff. And this can be very, very significant. And the final point I raise, which is often missed, is that it can be a very strong motivator for your staff. People in organizations really respond well to the belief that the company is going places outside the UK and is looking actively at global markets and at world markets. And my general advice to companies is, don't keep this a secret. Don't hide your export plans under a bushel, but share it with all of your staff and all of your teams, and you'll find that it's beneficial in every sense. And in fact, the academic research confirms all of this. There's quite a lot of really strong evidence that shows that exporting companies are generally stronger, and that they have the characteristics you see on my slide here as a result of exporting. So what then, in summary, are the benefits? There are all these things you see here: financial, in terms of the size of and the scope of your sales, your productivity, competitiveness, and all the others there. And that all sounds very positive, but of course it is possible to make some rudimentary rookie mistakes here. So first of all, what you need to do is identify what are the key factors for you, your company, and your product in terms of exporting. And in all companies, whether you're selling a hard product or a service or a soft product, it comes down to these key factors for export. You need to know and understand what is your competitive edge, and understand that that has to be the competitive edge you have in the target market, not the one that you're used to having here at home. It could be different. You have to know and recognize where you add value to your product. It may not be every aspect of what you do in the UK that's exportable. Just to give you an example, if you sell a piece of equipment and you also support and maintain it, then if you sell it to a market abroad, you can sell the equipment, but it's probably not practical for you to support and maintain or repair it. So you have to think about exporting it in a different way with a different business model than you use in the UK. But this is usually possible. You do have to know and understand the competitive landscape. Many companies embark on exporting to a market without even knowing what competitors there are in that market, and that's clearly a mistake. And finally, of course, your choice and selection of target market is fundamental, and I'll come on to that a bit later. So let's start with some of the don'ts here. I want to list here some of the more obvious common export pitfalls that you will encounter. The first and most common is to make assumptions about your export market based on what you know about the UK. What you know about the UK is highly relevant, but it nevertheless needs to be adapted and made applicable to your chosen export markets. Please don't assume that everything is the same out there as it is here. The second pitfall is not in itself a problem, but reactive exporting refers to companies that export simply when they're asked. They wait for inquiries or expressions of interest to come from abroad, and they respond to them slavishly and without understanding clearly what the criteria are that will apply to this piece of business. Now, reactive exporting itself, there's nothing illegitimate about that. It can be a very, very good way to do business. And if you can just sit back and wait for inquiries to come in, that's a very happy way to go. Most companies can't survive that way. But more importantly, it's vitally important that you recognize when you are being reactive to an opportunity from abroad. And if you know that you're reacting, it's important that your reaction is proportional to the likelihood of it being successful, and that you don't suddenly put all of your resources into responding to an inquiry which may be highly speculative indeed. So a proportionality there is really important, and knowing whether you're being reactive or proactive is vital and fundamental. Thirdly, the problem of realistic pricing into export markets often crops up. Companies will very often price rather blandly on the basis of what they know about their pricing in the UK, and this can be a big mistake. Of course, there are extra costs in serving markets overseas, but again, there may be extra volume in it which allows you to accept less margin, to accept a lower margin on your product, simply because the volume that you get means that your overall return on the investment in the product could be greater. So to recognize what the pricing criteria are in your target market is also fundamental, and we can help you do that. Having unrealistic expectations is a problem for all of us, I think, in all aspects of business, but there are some particular dangers in export markets, and I could characterize those perhaps best by saying that if you have £250,000 turnover in the UK with a population of 60 million, then automatically you're going to have 250 million turnover in China because the population is that big. So ergo, it's a perfect place to be. Unfortunately, life isn't that simple. And just taking a proportionality approach that way is very unrealistic. On the other hand, it can be that relatively small markets in terms of GDP or in terms of population or something like that, they can be excellent export markets for British companies because you can be more special or more unique or have more to offer in those markets. So market selection is very important indeed. And finally, one of the biggest problems is that companies very often forget to make sure that they get paid, or they forget to be specific about how they're going to be paid. And worst of all, they very often forget to be specific about when they're going to get paid. And all of these things can be dealt with at the outset if you just take good advice and just understand how these things are normally done and what the practices are that you should follow. There are some other pitfalls. And there is some good news later, I promise you, but these are other things to be aware of. Companies who embark on export very often chase too many markets at the outset, and it's important to resist this and to be highly selective about the number of markets that you become proactive in, because it is an expense to develop a position in a market. It does of course carry some attendant risk there. So if you get too widely involved, you can spread yourselves too thin, and particularly if you're small companies with limited resources, this can be a mistake. And again, UKTI can help to guide on this. Many companies in Britain in all kinds of sectors and all kinds of product need necessarily to appoint an agent, a distributor, or a value-added reseller in their target market. And this is a good way to go, by and large, because then you get some local expertise, some local strength, and there are many positives about this. But one of the most common pitfalls is doing a bad job at appointing these intermediaries, not knowing enough about them, appointing the first people who come along and ask you. At a show like this, people are easily seduced. And somebody comes up and is flattering about your product and says, we'd love to be your agent in Uzbekistan. And the next thing you know, you have a very untenable relationship with an organization in a market that you don't understand. Having said that, by understanding clearly what your relationship should be with intermediaries, knowing the ropes and taking advice, which is available from us easily, then you can avoid the bad news about this, and you can use this, this opportunity and this way of getting to market to the full. A classical mention, of course, is a failure to appreciate cultural differences. I don't think I need to belabor this here, but clearly it is possible to make rather crass mistakes at crucial times. And just by getting the right information, by looking it up and taking some sound advice on the way that you should behave in these markets, can make a huge difference to the way that you're received and the speed with which you can gain acceptance and credibility in the markets. In some sectors, the business of product conformance, both in terms of the legality of selling the product, the appropriacy of the way it's marked and labeled, but very often just simply the way that it's labeled and packaged and things like that. These can be quite important, and you need to be prepared to make sure that you know what criteria will apply to your product, particularly if it's a tangible product, a manufactured product. Then you need to know what criteria will apply to it when moving it to that country and when it's being used by people in that country. And again, there is a wealth of advice available to you here, but I'm sorry to say some companies still make blunders in this and will make some rather crass mistakes in this regard. And finally, questions of tax, of duty and of shipment and logistics and all of those things are, if you don't do your homework and if you don't get your facts straight to begin with, these are absolute minefields, because they can have a big effect on the landed price of your product. They can have big effects on the speed with which you can get your product to market, because if your products are held up in customs even for a relatively short time, it can be disastrous in terms of your delivery. And there are various other hazards too. Again, all easily overcome by taking the right advice. So we have to pose a question here. Having told you all about all of the terrible things that can happen when you're exporting, you have to ask yourselves the question, is this simply too risky, or is it too difficult for me or my company? And I have to tell you, no, it really isn't difficult and it isn't risky, providing you don't do anything foolish. You do need to understand the key features of your industry globally, know where the competition lies, know how your competitors operate in other parts of the world, which is a relatively easy thing to find out, and know how your target sector operates in those target countries. You need to understand the key factors for export that I've mentioned earlier. You need to research your target markets as fully as you possibly can. That doesn't mean to say that you grind it to a fine powder so that you know every little thing about the country, but you certainly need to make sure that you know the salient points about the country and about how business is done there. And finally, to serve with all of these things, you simply need to take advice at all stages. And I'm happy to say that advice does exist, and you can find such advice through UK Trade and Investment. UK Trade and Investment is the government service that helps you to develop your export potential overseas and helps to guide you to key markets. And it's our job to help companies, quite large companies in some cases, but predominantly small and medium-sized enterprises, to position themselves optimally for addressing markets overseas. So we help you to understand how it's done. We help you to gain insight into the markets, to find opportunities. We have schemes that help you open doors with the right people. We help you raise your profile and help particularly small companies enter a market with a high degree of credibility and quite high profile, and basically to punch above your weight. We help you understand the competition in those markets, and of course we help you with straightforward things like overseas marketing and communications. And the way that most of you should access these services are through a chap like me, or a lady like me. Not a lady like, you know what I mean. International, we have a panel of some hundreds of international trade advisors throughout the UK, and UKTI trade advisors offer you advice, and all of that advice is free, it's impartial, and it's confidential. I mean, actually, it isn't really free. What it means is you've already paid for it, so you really should take full advantage of it. But that advice is available to you when you need it from trade advisors, the vast majority of whom, it's important for you to know, are not civil servants or ever have been. We're all experienced exporters, and we've all been there and done that in a wide range of sectors and in a wide range, in all of the world. So there's a real powerful panel of usable advice for you there from UKTI International Trade Advisors. And depending on the region of the UK, there is a regional UKTI organization that's available and will refer you on to a trade advisor. Having met the trade advisors, we help you to develop your export plans, either very specific ones for certain markets or quite broad ones for a range of markets, depending on your requirements. We help you, of course, identify which of those are the best markets for you. We help advise, of course, on the grants that are available through us for trade missions, to help you do market research abroad, to help you find out facts about your key target markets abroad. We'll help you set up meetings with key people, sometimes through trade missions, sometimes through other mechanisms. And generally, we help you, as we say, to make business happen internationally. And although I said it before, I will stress this, all of this advice is free, impartial, and confidential, so I would urge you to use it. We have a wide portfolio of services, which I'm not going to read through or simply to read out to you. But whatever sort of business you are, there are some key services in here which you will find highly relevant for your business development. For small companies, Passport to Export is a sort of exporting 101 type of export primer. That's a program that lasts a year, and during that time there's some important close relationship that you develop with a trade advisor. For slightly more experienced companies, there's a similar program called Gateway to Global Growth. And the other services that you see listed there are all targetable at specific things that you want or need to achieve, and will give you access to the key markets abroad. And UKTI has considerable presence in those markets abroad. Here are some numbers which I won't read out, but we have significant staff throughout the world. The UK is a country that punches above its weight in terms of our presence worldwide, and a very high proportion of these teams that we have in overseas markets are locally engaged people. They are local nationals who are permanently engaged to support British business in those countries. So naturally, and this is an important consideration, naturally they understand the language and the culture, and they're permanently networked in with the business community there. So they're a really important resource for you to use. The best way for you to access that resource, however, is through the advisory network here in the UK, so that you have a nice, smooth path towards influence in those countries. By the way, for those of you who come from Wales, Northern Ireland, Scotland, in the devolved administrations, there are similar organizations there that use and can employ the same resources worldwide. And as I mentioned earlier, our advisors are experienced exporters who really know the ropes in the countries involved. So why use those services? Because it's an absolutely unrivaled network of advice and support that's available to you free of charge. Okay, here are some of the numbers which I won't read out about the successes that we had in supporting businesses. The last published figures are up to the end of 2012. And it generates real significant value for the country. And we're quite proud of the fact that we're sort of pound positive in terms of what we do nationally. And not all government agencies can claim that. Okay, we support a lot of activity in a lot of places, and we really can give you reach that you wouldn't have alone. So I commend it to you. So in summary, I just want to give you the clear message that exporting need not be difficult or risky. But information, understanding, and good preparation are your keys to success. There's tons of advice available for you, lots of practical help. There's some financial support available to you too through UKTI. And to take advantage of it, what you should do is read the little brochure that you see on your seats there. which is beautifully positioned by each one of you. Read that for your basic information there. Get in touch with UKTI in your region. And if you're not sure of your region, if you go onto the main UKTI website and key in your postcode, it'll tell you what region of UKTI, what the UKTI regional team is that's relevant. And get straight in touch with them and ask to be referred to an international trade advisor. And when you meet or speak to that trade advisor on the telephone, the process will begin. So the final point is to make use of all of the programs. So that's it for me, just a quick rundown of the do's and don'ts. If any of you would like to ask questions, I'm happy to take them now.